Hello, welcome to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, disparate impact, ethical risk, and good governance. So today, I'm actually going to sort of deviate from talking about uh, doing AI ethics or the content of AI ethics and AI governance and auditing, and talk a little bit meta about the process of getting into this field and some of my thoughts on this, and share a little bit of my experience, partly because I mean, there's a lot of people that have interest in this field who have a lot of passion and are trying to figure out where do they fit, how are they going to get into the field, whether they want to get into the field or not. And I've taught a class on this. It's called Finding Your Place in AI Ethics Consulting, and I think it's a topic that it's good to get into, and I think people might be interested in that. So for this, before I even get started, I want to say, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Put them in now as we go. I'm going to just sort of ramble a little bit, and I have a presentation which I'll go through, and I'll see how fast I want to go through it. I might skip some bits, but let me first do the presentation, and then I will start talking a little bit about what my experiences have been. And so let me share my screen, move things out of the way, and so let me go all the way back here. Okay, and so this I've adapted some of this from Finding Your Place in AI Ethics Consulting, and so this is sort of a getting started piece. So I think one of the things, so if you're listening, my guess is I don't have to convince you why this is kind of an important field or an important thing to get into. And I'll just tell you my experience. I was really interested in AI and machine learning. I'm a professor of astrophysics, and I use machine learning in my research. And I got really interested in maybe doing machine learning and applying it other places. And so I actually decided I wanted to start a business, and I wanted to go see what there was to do, some way to sort of contribute to society. And as I did this sort of exploratory process of like figuring out what do I want to do, and some people might have heard this, my original idea was I was going to apply machine learning to like space or aerospace industry, and it made sense given I have a PhD in astrophysics. And the more I started doing research in how AI was being used, I started realizing that there was this real problem with how rapidly we're adopting AI, and all of the ethical issues that came with that. And so what I saw is, I had a particular skill set which was technical, but I knew a lot of ethicists, and I had, I thought quite deeply about these sort of ethical issues. And I felt that, algorithm auditing was a nice place where these two things combined, because the core idea is to make sure that we can test these systems so that they don't hurt people or they don't cause harm. And so that's where I came into this. A lot of you may have come in from a different angle. You might have seen some news articles, something that sort of sparked your interest in terms of the justice or the injustice of how some of these systems might get used. But when you're talking about getting into the field, meaning doing this as a job where you're getting paid to do it, I think it is important to step back from that for a second and think about what are the core motivations for businesses to engage in AI ethics. And I think understanding those core motivations, you know what your motivations are, but understanding what their core motivations are is going to be important for kind of finding where you fit into this. And so I won't go through this too much, but in my mind, there are kind of three areas that are really key. One is risk mitigation, and there's many risks now with using AI inappropriately. for businesses. And so I can break these down into a bunch, and I will break them down. Yeah. So there's risk mitigation. There's this sort of upside of building trust, and then there's intrinsic societal good. And the risk mitigation is probably one of the most important for you, thinking about how you can contribute and do work in this field, because that's really where a lot of the work lies currently. So things like auditing, things like AI governance or AI ethics consulting, the majority of what you're going to be doing can be broken down into sort of into the risk bucket. Like how do you address the risk to that companies would feel? And so the major risks are there's ethical risk, there's safety risk. Ethical risk is just sort of like doing things that are unethical, right? And from ethical risk and safety risk, which is like doing something that's potentially dangerous or cause some harm to someone, from that sort of flows other kinds of risks like compliance risk, reputational risk, which comes a lot from the ethical risk, liability risk, and there's also sort of business risk when you've invested a lot in AI, and there's financial downsides if that ends up you have to kill a project, for instance, after you've invested a lot in it. And so a big part of what you would be doing as a consultant and across many different areas, including auditing and governance, is just be very aware and be able to spot and recognize these risks. So in the course, and this is just taken a little bit from the course, I sort of break it down really into these three kind of fundamental modes, which the kind of modes of working when you're doing consulting and in this particular field, and spotting the risks due to AI is probably the most important. Like being able to just recognize in sort of a socio-technical system, where are those risks? The next mode would be, of course, researching and solutions to how you mitigate that. So what are the mitigating solutions you can find? And then, of course, communication of those solutions or communication between different stakeholders, that's a really important mode. And a lot of what you do is literally just clear communication between different stakeholders, whether it's communication to try to gather information or communication to deliver information that's going to be of value to your clients in some way. So there's a ton of specialized modes as well. And so if you're thinking, and throughout this, I want you to be thinking about what you have for skill sets. Like, what do you do currently? What's your current job? What are your current skill sets? What did you learn in school? What are your strong points? Think about that as I'm going through this, because it's relevant for really finding your place. So besides those three really very general fundamental modes, which is the spotting risk, researching and finding solutions, and then communicating those solutions, there's a lot of really specialized things that you could do. So ethical reasoning, like if you have an ethics background, that's hugely valuable, and being able to think analytically and like applied ethics, that's really, really valuable. Things like conducting interviews, that's actually that's very, very specific. It's not something that like you go to school to do that, but being able to talk to people and get them to ask for you to ask the right questions, to not waste a lot of time. I mean, that's a skill in and of itself. And so if you have a job where you've done a lot of that sort of thing, where you've conducted interviews and you've talked with stakeholders, that's really important. Bias testing is another really niche area where that happens a lot in consulting. Audit, if you have audit experience, or if you have experience, whether it's internal audit or any kind of sort of oversight function where you have to evaluate compliance against some criteria, that's very valuable, even if you're not working sort of formally in algorithmic auditing. As a consultant, having that experience is pretty important, or can be very important. Working with stakeholders, so being able to sort of map stakeholders and engage with stakeholders, both internal and external, That's something that we do a lot as consultants. So if you have experience there, that's really important. A legal background, hugely valuable. If nothing else, the ability to sort of digest legal documents and regulations and sort of boil it down to things that people can understand. That's really valuable. There's also other things that you would not necessarily think of immediately, like user experience research. A lot of where the real risks lie from our experience is where these systems, these AI systems, interface with humans. And that's something that as a company we really push and really investigate, because misunderstandings or slight changes in the user experience when someone's interacting with AI can change or mitigate a lot of that risk or amplify it. So that's something we found is a really valuable thing. And so if you have that kind of experience, it can definitely be applied to this field. Similarly, or along the same vein, explainable machine learning research and development. So the idea of taking a black box model or some opaque algorithm and being able to come up or develop explanations for why that algorithm made certain decisions, and that they can be global explanations or what are called local explanations for an individual inference. But that kind of research is also really valuable. Just plain old machine learning, if you have technical background, I have to say that's really hard to come by. And having that, so if you are someone who's done machine learning before and you want to get into the field of AI ethics, then you already have a really valuable skill set, because being able to communicate with developers in their language is really important. Then, of course, there's governance, this sort of just plain old management of systems and policies and procedures, accountability, that kind of experience. So if you've worked in a big organization and you've managed those kind of approval processes and workflows, those are all things that are necessary. And if you can put it in the context of AI risk, especially, that is also a place where you can find, it's one of these specialized modes of thinking in terms of consulting. So I want to talk a tiny bit about the technical versus non-technical skills, because I find a lot of the people that reach out to me that are interested in getting in this field do not come from a technical background. And one of the most common questions is, do I need to have a technical background? Do I need to understand the technology? And I think the answer is yes and no. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But while a lot of the work that we do is focused on AI and the algorithmic system itself, the vast majority of the things that we do, the actual tasks, the day-to-day things that are done, are non-technical. And so that's good news for those of you who don't have that deep technical knowledge right now. A lot of what's done day-to-day is not actually technical. And so, and it boils down to something that's very simple. And I think everyone is in this field has begun to realize this over the years, that the socio-technical system is often more social than technical. So, we use this term socio-technical system, and it's the idea of a technical system embedded in a social environment, a place where there are people and there are power dynamics, and there are lots of non-technical factors involved. And most of the socio-technical system is social. It's the socio part. It's not the technical part. The technical part typically is very narrow. And a lot of what we do is we focus on these automated decision systems, an ADS, which is a system which is going to make some inference or make some decision, or typically a decision augmentation system where someone that inference is given to a human, and that human makes a decision. So typically, most of that system is non-algorithmic. You have people who are making decisions about how that system is built, or how the inputs go into that system, where it's being used, how it's being used. The algorithm will make some assessment, but then that typically gets fed to people, and those people will end up making decisions about it. It's not always the case. Sometimes it is really, really technical, and it's just like it's more technical, but for the most part, it's not. For the most part, the way systems are currently used, there's a huge amount of social factors in this. And so it's really important. These are places you can apply your non-technical skills to reason through where a lot of the risks lie. And we have a framework, which you call the CEDA, sort of the CEDA framework, or the CEDA narrative, where we talk about the context of the system, how it's being used, where it's being used, a lot of the factors. The context is a very broad and detailed sense of how the system is being used. We talk about the inputs, the CI, so I is for inputs, what's actually getting fed into the algorithm, how is it getting, in what way is it getting filtered, who decided on those inputs, and how important are they. There's the decision system. The D is the decision part itself. That's the algorithm. So that's the literal taking the inputs and giving you an output. And so that's the decision procedure, that's the technical bit. And then you have the A, which is the action part. What action is taken after that? You get that output. And so most of this CEDA narrative for the socio-technical system is socio. And so I just wanted to emphasize that there's so much going on that's not technical, that there's a lot of work to be done in the non-technical area. And so, this is just me reminding you, like, if you're thinking about this, think about where some of your non-technical skills and experiences can be useful. And I'm going to put this same slide up again, because here you can see that the majority of these sort of specialized modes, as I call them, are not technical. You don't have to be a machine learning engineer for the majority of these. And having a background in social sciences, legal background, having a background in ethics, these are all, that's most of what's being done in this sort of work. Now, let's say you work in a really specific industry right now, right? You're in a particular industry, and you see this AI ethics field starting to grow, and you want to get into it, but you've spent most of your career or your education focused on really specific or domain specific things. So things like human resources, maybe education or ed tech, financial industry, medicine or public health, ethics, legal, compliance, etc. You name it, right? I think that one thing that you should consider is, how can you take that expertise and map it onto doing some interesting AI ethics work? And it's actually not that hard to do, because all of these industries, and any industry you can think of, is going to get disrupted in some way by AI. And so all of the ones I've listed here are the ones, except for ethics and ESG. I mean, that too, but all of these are already getting disrupted by AI. So, if you're in one of these industries, or an industry where AI is becoming really prominent, you have an opportunity to apply your domain-specific knowledge to governing these systems, because a lot of what needs to get done is to think about very specifically about a particular use case. So how you might govern or assess or mitigate risk of AI in a human resources setting is very different than how you might do it in a medical setting, or public health, or in the financial industry. And so, there aren't going to be as many sort of generalist AI ethics people out there. And it's going to very quickly transition to a place where it's very domain specific. And so it actually is a good thing if you can take that domain specific knowledge and start thinking about, how would I apply that? Or in my industry, how is AI getting used? what are the risks? That's always kind of the first thing you want to ask. What are the risks of this? And then how can this industry mitigate those risks? You can look at it from a policy perspective. You can look at it from a sort of operational perspective or governance perspective. You can look at it from a technical perspective if you have that knowledge. And there's a ton of work that needs to get done. There's so many unanswered questions in this field, and that's part of what's exciting about a young field like this, is that and a rapidly sort of evolving industry, is that we don't have these answers yet. And so people in these industries that are getting disrupted, the people who already have been in these industries for a long time, they're going to be critically important for solving they're going to be the ones who solve a lot of these problems. They'll have to just acquire some of the specific skills that are unique. They're not even unique, but are sort of uniquely applied to AI ethics. Okay. I'm going to skip some of the skills here. So one thing I want to say, so for those who are listening, by the way, I'm going through a presentation, so I'm going to try to be as verbose about this as possible if you don't have a screen. One thing that I've noticed that was super powerful for me is the idea of a case study. And when I was learning how to do this, and I did have to learn how to do this, I had to have concrete examples. And so a case study can be almost anything. But you think about a particular use case for AI, and ideally a real one. Like you can make one up, but there's so many out there now, and there's so many things that people are trying to do with AI. It's not hard to find a real example. And what you want to do is you want to sort of take that case study and really dig deep. And so what we did at BABL is before people started paying us to do things, we had to kind of get our hands dirty with these case studies and actually figure out how would we identify, categorize, and mitigate risk in a particular use case. And what are the things we have to know in order to figure out how to do that? What frameworks do we need in order to do it effectively and sort of make it reproducible? What did we miss? You'll have sort of a post-mortem on these things, and you look back at what you would have missed or what you did miss. And how would you have not missed that in hindsight? And so case studies are a great way to sort of build experience, gain those skills. And, it's always good to do it with people. And so if you can do it, if someone can hire you to do it, that would be perfect. But in the absence of that, we didn't ask for people we did, but, people weren't paying us to do these things in the beginning. We would literally, we went to a local school district and said, hey, you're using AI for some of your things. You want us to do a risk assessment on it. We just, for free, we'll just do it for free. Or we offered our services, or we just found case studies to try to hone our ability. And I think that's really important. And, talking to companies and talking to people who are in the field about their challenges, what they do, this is a great way to find out where your particular skills might be of great value, and often unexpectedly. You might not realize that the things that you do every day with your current job are actually something that is maybe even lacking, because AI ethics is a very new field as it's applied in industry for sure. And so things are still evolving, and there might be things that you do every day that AI ethicists didn't even really know they needed. And so it's, don't be afraid to kind of reach out, talk to people, figure out what they do. So another thing I get quite often is this idea of background. What kind of educational background do you need? Do I need to have a degree in this? Do I need to have a technical background? Do I need a certificate? What do I need to do to actually get this started? And this is a super tough, thing to answer, but I've sort of tried to think through this quite a bit. And a lot of it depends on your background, your current background. So I have to say that the technical bit, there does need to be some technical knowledge. And when I say that, what I mean is a general awareness and an understanding of how machine learning and artificial intelligence and automated systems work. It doesn't have to be like super deep in the sense, I should take that back. It doesn't have to be super technical in the sense that you can write a code to do neural networks or that you understand all of the most current advances in this field. But you do have to have enough knowledge to understand why risk comes from these systems. Like, what are the risky things in the system? And there are a whole bunch of areas. We have a whole course on this, but there's a whole bunch of areas where you kind of do need to know a little bit of the technical background of how these systems are trained and developed to get that. So you do need to acquire some level of that kind of skill. And so what you should think about is like, kind of, what is your background? So some of it is math background. Math is kind of, if you have a lot of mathematics background, then some of this stuff will be quite easy to pick up and understand. You don't actually have to get into the coding so much. It's more sort of thinking through statistics ends up being pretty important. Then you have to think about your current degree field. So what approach you take is going to depend on if you're going from the sciences or from the social sciences or more qualitative area. So I'll tell you my experience. Well, let me first go through this and I'll tell you my experience. And then another factor is your current degree level. Like, do you have a BA, an MA, a PhD? If you don't have a college degree yet, it's going to be pretty difficult to do this. I think times are changing, and higher education is getting disrupted. And I have a feeling that in 10 years' time, this advice will not be the case, that you have to have a college degree. And I think in a lot of senses, colleges are unnecessary filters for advancement. They're gatekeepers in a way that's not healthy. But currently, having a degree is going to be pretty important, at least a BA or a BS. But the higher, the better. And then in some respects, it depends on your personality. So if you're someone who's good at self-study, where you can sit down and really dig deep and just learn something brand new, then you're going and getting a certificate or going to get a degree may not be necessary if you can really dedicate yourself. And also your ability to proactively find and complete projects from beginning to end, because producing things, whether that's like a white paper or research paper, just a project that you put on the web, that kind of thing demonstrates your knowledge and your ability. And if you can do that without having to go get a degree, then it's pretty, you're less likely to need a degree. So let me stop sharing. So let me check real quick to see if I have any questions before I continue. So nothing currently. All right. So let me talk a little bit about my experience. So, I teach at the University of Iowa. I'm a professor of astrophysics or physics, and I have a PhD in astrophysics. None of that is really relevant for AI ethics or algorithmic auditing, for that matter. So, I came from a totally left field. Now, knowing that, so I just became interested in this issue, AI ethics, more broadly, and then more in particular, I found my niche, which was algorithmic auditing. And so this is why I talk about finding your place in AI ethics consulting. Like, you don't want to just be an AI ethics consultant. What you want to be is someone who has a very specific niche that they fill, and to really go deep in that niche. I think that's, especially if you're not going to go the route of getting a degree or a PhD in a particular field and then go into some big consulting firm. If you're trying to kind of go out on your own and do it, then having that niche, I think, is super important. You need to distinguish yourself from everybody else, because currently there are a lot of people talking about these issues, talking about them on social media, writing about them, either academic writing or in news articles and things like this. So there are a lot of voices, and they're becoming more and more voices, which is great, and I think that's a good thing. But for someone who wants to get started in the field, you have to find your unique place where you are going to contribute, and your unique sort of perspective. And it can be not just sort of your background knowledge, it could be your lived experience, right? Your particular place that you live in the world, your whatever particular identity you have for yourself, those experiences that you had in the past, those things can drive and focus where you are, what your niche is. And so for me, I had some machine learning background. I did research in machine learning, but not like I wasn't developing machine learning tools for industry or anything. It was very astrophysics focused. But auditing was the thing that I really focused on. And in particular, I asked myself the question, if someone were to give me an algorithm right now, like an algorithmic system right now, how would I audit that? And what does auditing even mean, right? And so when I first started, I basically just dove into the research. I dove into the news articles. I basically just kept track of everything that was happening, all the incidences that happened where AI tended to be biased or it was misused in some way. I had a big folder on and I still have it, although you can't keep up anymore, with all of these news articles and every white paper that got published. And I thought about all of that in the context of this question of what is auditing and how do I approach it? If someone told me right now, here's my system, audit it for me, how would I do that? And that was a really great framing for me. I picked my question, and it allowed me to focus and filter through a lot of the other things that were, because there's so much out there, so much material, you can never keep up with the reading. And so we have to have that really clear framing of what question are you trying to answer. And so with that, I basically dove in and figured out, what does auditing mean? I found some collaborators to work with, some ethicists and lawyers. We approached this problem kind of academically in some sense, in a real sense, in the sense we published our work. And we came up with, auditing it's a way of sort of identifying and mitigating sort of potential harm or infringement of interests of stakeholders. And then we just kept working. Like I dedicated myself to trying to figure out how to solve this problem. I asked a lot of people. I talked to businesses. I talked to mentors. I wrote a lot. And I talk about this in the course. I did this process which I called value multiplication, and it's kind of a silly thing, and you've probably heard the term value addition, or value add, right? So you read something. So I would take like some sort of white paper, or I take a research article that described some problem with AI, or I take a case study, and I would absorb that. I would just be obsessed with absorbing, what is this case study all about? What are they talking about? What are the problems? And I would just absorb that. So I call that value absorption. I just absorb every little piece so I fully understood it, or at least where I thought I fully understood it. The next step was value addition. So value added, you'd basically start writing. I would write about that. I try to summarize it. Like, could I boil down something big into a few really key important things? And so this is, you're adding value by making things simpler, making that big piece of material manageable for other people. And often I'd post this on social media. Could I boil it down? And then in order to be really value add, I'd have to sort of have some stance. I'd have to have some comment. This could have been done better. Maybe this is an approach that you could take to mitigating this risk, there would be some sort of like extra added value that I'd put to that. And that was a really important exercise for me to do that. And then the value multiplication thing is a play on words or a play on the value add, in the sense that what I would try to do is go even further and come up with a conceptual framework for the problem. Like how would I generalize this problem? And can I sort of come up with a conceptual framework that would lead to a procedural framework where I can actually put this knowledge into action in some way? And it may be something that, like, a conceptual framework would be useful for, let's say a new case study comes along, I'd be able to just drop it into that conceptual framework. Oh, this is this kind of risk. And if it's this kind of, it has a relationship with these other kind of concepts in this particular way. Or the next level, which is even better, is a procedural framework where, okay, now that I know it's that kind of risk, what are the procedures I could do to get some, either come up with some mitigation strategy, come up with a testing strategy, come up with something that could actually, I could take action based on that. So if any of you are still there, for some reason, the Zoom decided to quit on me mid-sentence. So my apologies for that. So let me just continue with that thought. So at the end of the day, my experience was, given that I didn't have a degree in there was no degree in AI ethics when I started. This was like 2018. There had been plenty of academic work on it, but it wasn't really. It's still not even really a field necessarily. There are some organizations that have degrees in this now, especially like masters and certificate programs. But at that time, there wasn't, and so a lot of my experience had to come from literally just doing research on my own and figuring out what's going to work. And I approached it from a really empirical perspective. Like, I didn't want just theoretical understanding, because a lot of people at that time, and still, in fact, are publishing white papers on sort of theoretical frameworks which aren't super grounded in any sort of empirical understanding whether any of those frameworks will work. And so when I approached it early on, I wanted to know what was going to work, what would actually allow me to identify risk, or actually allow me to test for bias in a robust way. A lot of it was just empirically driven. And so, I would encourage anybody who's thinking about getting into this field to think about those core questions. Like, what is the question you really want to answer? And then, ideally it's informed by the skills you already have, but don't be afraid of going out and acquiring those skills if you don't have them. If there are skills you need to answer that question, they can be gotten. And, doing it through formal education is one path, and there are more options available for getting, master's degrees, certificate programs, just certifications. They're out there, but you don't necessarily need it. You can sort of hone in on figuring out how do you answer your specific question. And the more niche it is, the more sort of specific it is, the more likely you can become an expert in a very narrow area, which ultimately is what you end up needing to do in order to really thrive in this business, is to find out where are you going to go deep and become an expert and bring a lot of value to people.